Hello everyone. Today I would be talking about cardiac failure. I would be defining cardiac failure and also I would be talking about its causes and pathophysiology. So first I would define cardiac failure. So basically it is the inability of the heart to maintain an adequate output to meet the metabolic demands of the body. So heart, it's a pumping organ. It pumps oxygenated blood. It pumps oxygenated blood to various parts of the body, to various body tissues, so that they can function properly. They can utilize this oxygen and function properly. So when heart fails to maintain a sufficient circulation, then it results in cardiac failure. There is an inability of the heart to maintain an adequate output to meet the metabolic demands of the body. Basically that is cardiac failure. So there is ejection fraction, there is reduced ejection fraction and preserved ejection fraction. So what is ejection? I will be talking about ejection fraction. So basically ejection fraction is the volumetric fraction of blood which is ejected from the ventricle or atrium, and it tells us about the volume of blood which is ejected in response to the blood which is entering inside the atrium or ventricle, and its normal values is 50 to 70%. And when the volume of blood pumped by the ventricle is reduced, then it is called as systolic heart failure. Reduced ejection fraction, it leads to systolic heart failure. And when this ejection fraction is preserved, then it is known as diastolic heart failure. So basically this is about definition of cardiac failure. Now I would be talking about causes, etiology of cardiac failure. So first I would be talking about when the ejection fraction is reduced, that is less than 40%, so it is systolic heart failure. So causes are coronary artery disease like MI and chronic pressure overload. So when there is pressure overload, it occurs in basically in valvular diseases, in stenosis, when there is narrowing of the valves, stenosis of the valves like mitral stenosis and all. So it causes pressure overload, chronic pressure overload. And also in hypertension there is pressure, there is overload of pressure, there is pressure overload. So these are the conditions which cause heart failure. Another cause is chronic volume overload. So this occurs in regurgitation, when there is regurgitation of the blood from the subsequent ventricle to the behind. Volume overload, it occurs in regurgitant diseases when the blood regurgitates. Then for example in mitral regurgitation, aortic regurgitation. In mitral regurgitation, the blood regurgitates from the left ventricle to the left atrium, and it results in dilatation of the left atrium. So basically it leads to chronic volume overload. So these conditions cause heart failure. Chronic lung disease like COPD and all, so these also can result in heart failure. Then cardiomyopathy, non-ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy, basically this is seen in alcoholics and all. And there can be drug induced damage and Chagas disease. This is a parasitic infection, Trypanosoma cruzi. So basically this can lead to cardiac failure. And disorders of rate and rhythm, arrhythmias, chronic tachyarrhythmias. So basically these are the causes of reduced ejection fraction when it is less than 40% systolic heart failure. Now I will be talking about preserved, when the ejection fraction is preserved, basically that is diastolic heart failure. So it can occur in pathological hypertrophy. So when the ventricles and all they dilate, they hypertrophy, when there is increase in the size. So this can lead to preserved ejection fraction, diastolic heart failure. Then restrictive cardiomyopathy, it is a type of cardiomyopathy. And fibrosis means scarring of tissues. So and endomyocardial disorder. So these are the causes which leads to preserved ejection fraction heart failure. When the ejection fraction is preserved and it leads to heart failure, basically that is diastolic heart failure. So you should know these conditions. High output states like metabolic disorders like thyrotoxicosis and excessive blood flow requirements as in anemia. So basically these disorders also can precipitate heart failure. Now I would be talking about pathophysiology of heart failure. So cardiac output is low and it leads to organ hypoperfusion. means the blood supply to the organs is reduced, and hence the oxygen supply to the organs is compromised. There is inadequate oxygen supply along with decreased cardiac reserve, and it leads to pulmonary and systemic venous congestion. It means the blood is accumulated in the pulmonary and systemic veins, and it leads to congestion. So basically this is the pathophysiology of heart failure. Compensatory adaptations: increase in the left ventricular mass, that is left ventricular hypertrophy, and dilatation of the left ventricle. So basically this adaptation helps the heart to pump more amount of blood. Then there is increase in the systemic vascular resistance, and also there is activation of the RAS, that is renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So basically this is secreted by the renin, is secreted by the kidneys, and aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal gland. So these act as potent vasoconstrictors. They increase the vascular resistance, they retain the sodium so that the blood pressure is increased. So activation of the RAS, so this is a compensatory adaptation. Now second is the left ventricular remodeling. There is alteration, there is changes in the myocyte biology. So first is the excitation contraction coupling. So electrical stimulation which leads to mechanical contraction of the heart. So basically that is excitation contraction coupling. Myosin heavy chain fetal expression, it is increased. So there is sliding. So basically there is sliding theory where myosin and actin, they bind and they slide on each other in presence of ATP to produce the muscle contraction. So basically that is the myosin heavy chain fetal expression. Beta adrenergic desensitization. So repeated stimulation of the heart leads to reduce in the responsiveness. The responsiveness of the heart is reduced on repeated stimulation. The beta adrenergic receptors, they are desensitized in presence of stress hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline. Heart doesn't respond, it desensitizes. So basically that is beta adrenergic desensitization. There is hypertrophy of the left ventricle, as I have discussed earlier. There is myocytolysis, there is breakdown of the myocytes, that is myocytolysis. Cytoskeletal proteins. So basically these are the one of the major changes. Then there are myocardial changes. First I talked about myocyte biology. Now I am talking about myocardial changes. So there is myocyte loss, there is loss of the muscle, of the cardiac muscle. So basically that is myocyte loss. Matrix degradation and myocardial fibrosis, there is degradation of the matrix, and also there is myocardial fibrosis, there is myocardial scarring. So last is the geometrical alterations of the left ventricle. So there are basically changes in the geometry of the left ventricle, like dilatation of the left ventricle and increase in the sphericity, that the left ventricle becomes more spherical. So basically these are the geometrical changes of the left ventricle. And also there is thinning of the walls of the left ventricle, and there is incompetence of the mitral valves, there is mitral valve incompetence. So these are the geometrical alterations of the left ventricular chambers. So basically in this video I have talked about the definition of cardiac failure, its causes of cardiac failure and pathophysiology of cardiac failure. In next class I would be classifying cardiac failure, and also I would be talking about investigations of cardiac failure. Thank you.